The year is 2343, and you work for NASA, the oldest space agency on planet Earth. You and your colleagues have studied Mars for over 20 years, and you would like to expand your research to study Mars's moons, Phobos and Deimos. You plan to launch a rocket to each moon that will hold a variety of probes and cameras. However, you recognize that the gravitational force might change the potential and kinetic energy of the rocket. You know that gravity on Earth is at 9.8 meters per second squared, and that this is an important variable in the calculation of potential energy. You and your team must calculate the gravitational potential energy and kinetic energy for a rocket launching from Mars to each of Mars's moons, Phobos and Deimos. Are you and your students ready to complete this mission? To begin, let's think about the essential question. In this unit plan, your students need to discover how the gravitational potential energy transforms into kinetic energy during a model rocket flight. This unit plan covers physical and engineering standards from the NGSS for middle school students, along with a standard for Common Core English grades 6 through 8, and Common Core Math for 6th and 7th grade students. All those standards? Check. Let's talk about the equipment list. Each student will need a student design portfolio, safety goggles, a clipboard, calculator, scissors, a ruler, meter stick, rubber band, bamboo skewer, straw, masking tape, pennies, permanent marker, and a stopwatch. Phew. In addition, the entire class will need 3 lifetime launch systems and 3 Estes altimeters. We recommend about 1 per 10 students. Each group will need a green eggs rocket kit, C11-3 engines, glue, hobby knife, fine sandpaper, paint and primer, and a camera, which is optional. You might be thinking, that's a pretty long list of equipment. However, you can get a variety of these things at the dollar store. Let's go over some background information to help you successfully teach this lesson, starting with energy transformation. Potential energy is energy that is stored in an object and is dependent on its position. While there are several different types of potential energy, we're going to focus on gravitational potential energy in this unit, which is energy that is stored because of an object's height. Since gravitational potential energy is dependent on planetary gravitational force, an object on Mars is going to have a different gravitational potential energy than on planet Earth. The law of conservation of energy states that energy is never created nor destroyed. It's just transformed. In a model rocket, for example, gravitational potential energy is transformed into kinetic energy. Kinetic energy is the energy of motion. The model rocket flight sequence is the perfect example of the law of conservation of energy, as you can see from the graphic here. If you're looking for additional resources, be sure to check out the potential and kinetic energy slide presentation that's included when you download this unit plan. We've also included additional links to resources that will be of help to you in the description below. And now you have all that you need to successfully complete this mission. Before you are ready to teach this unit, here's some tips to help you get started. 1. Prepare the student design portfolios ahead of time. Determine if you want to print them or make them available electronically. 2. Assemble and display a green eggs rocket. Be sure that you've had plenty of time to build it yourself and are aware of all the kinks and the instructions before you do it in front of a large class of students. 3. Gather the materials needed to build the rocket and launch. And 4. Find a safe launch site ahead of time. If you're ever unsure of where to launch your rockets, be sure to email us at educator@estesrockets.com and we'll be happy to help. As always, STEM learning offers open-ended solutions. Promote wild ideas and encourage your students to think creatively. If some students are having difficulty with their rockets, you can always partner them with students who are a little bit more advanced in building techniques. And finally, be enthusiastic. The more excited you are about this experience, the more excited your students will be. Our unit plans typically follow the engineering design process. This unit is no different. This 7-step process begins with step 1, ask, identify, and define the problem. After you review the potential and kinetic energy slide presentation with your students, you can assign them Activity 1, where they will identify the gravitational, potential energy, and kinetic energy during the different stages of a model rocket's flight. Next, you can assign Activity 2, Read the Problem. This is where students are going to read the problem that we talked about all the way at the beginning of this video. This is where you really want to be enthusiastic. Either you can choose to read this story out loud to your students, have one of the students read it out loud to the class, or even use the first part of this video to really allow the students to imagine themselves completing this mission inside their classroom. Then, students will complete a think, pair, share activity to ensure that they understand the problem and the essential question of this lesson. Now let's move on to the Imagine section, where students can brainstorm and research ideas. Typically, it's a hands-on activity. In this unit plan, students will be building and launching rubber band rockets. They'll launch each rocket 6 times, 3 with one weight and 3 with an additional weight. They'll also be recording the time from launch to apogee. Then they'll move on to Activity 2, where they'll calculate the gravitational potential energy and the kinetic energy. We always include this type of activity during the Imagine section to help students better understand the topics that were described in the slide presentation before they move on to building their actual rockets. Let's move on to the Plan section. This is where students will better understand the data they've collected from the rubber band rocket and define relationships between variables. First, students will be introduced to variables themselves. These include independent and dependent variables, along with the controls. Then, students will learn about the correlations between different experimental variables, such as mass and velocity or height and gravitational potential energy. And finally, students will use what they've learned to make predictions about how everything will change on Mars. Then we move on to the Create section, where students are building a model or a prototype. In this case, they're building the Green Eggs model rocket. First, students are actually going to build their rocket. If you're teaching a middle school class, we do recommend about 3 students to 1 rocket. It's a bigger rocket and a little bit more challenging. Once students have completed their rockets, you're going to prep the rockets for flight, including things like adding recovery wadding, folding parachutes properly, inserting engines and starters into the rocket so they're ready to go. We do recommend doing this inside the classroom before you go out to launch. And finally, you always want to review the model rocket safety code before you go out to launch. Be sure that every student gets a copy, reads it, and checks all the boxes so you know they're prepared for flight. Now we can move on to the best part, the launch. Here, students will be launching their rockets and collecting all their data. Before you go out to launch, make sure each group calculates the mass of their rocket with the engine and the altimeter inside. Once that's complete, you can go outside with your students to the launch site. Each group will launch their rocket and record their data. The altimeter will calculate the highest altitude or apogee of the rocket. Students can use a stopwatch to calculate the time to that altitude or apogee. Finally, once you're done with all of the rocket launches, take the students back into the classroom, where you can then calculate the class averages. Once those averages are calculated, use them for each student to calculate the gravitational potential energy and kinetic energy of the rocket. Moving on to the Evaluate section, where students can analyze, apply their data, and make predictions on how they could optimize and redesign their solution. Here, students are going to return back to the essential question. Remember, we're trying to figure out how does gravitational potential energy transform into kinetic energy in a model rocket flight. At this point, the students have had plenty of practice, so they should be able to easily use their data to answer that question. We also want to connect back to the problem. It is the year 2343 after all. Students will return back to that problem and determine how the potential energy of the rocket would change if it was launched on Mars. And finally, the last step. This is where students are going to communicate their results. Remember, you always want to make sure students can take all of the data and information they've learned and communicate it effectively. That's why we've chosen the assessment Claims Evidence Reasoning for this unit. We also include an optional multiple choice test and a choice board of different activities if you choose to further assess your students. And there you have it. You and your students are well on your way to completing your mission for NASA and powering up. If you want to use this unit in your classroom but you're worried about funding, go to the link in the description below and find more resources on our website on how you can apply for a grant to fund your next project. And that's all we have for you today. Check back with us soon and learn more about how you can use model rockets to inspire the next generation of leaders in space. Thanks for watching with Estes Education. If you liked this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell to be alerted for new content. We'll see you soon!